today's event specifically, we're raising awareness on the human rights violations that take place in the occupied territories by the Israeli Defense Forces mainly. And we're talking about how is it like to live under occupation and apartheid, and how freedom of movement is deprived for Palestinians, and how invasions and things like that that happen on a daily basis affect the lives of Palestinians. So I've lived all my life in Ramallah, and I had to pass checkpoints all the time to travel to go visit family. Even though I live like 10 minutes away from Jerusalem and my family is originally from Jerusalem, I can't even visit just because I'm Palestinian and have a Palestinian West Bank ID. The week is controversial, but this event specifically, we're not talking about we're not relating any political issues. We're not trying to talk about the resolution for the conflict, or we're not taking any political stand, and we're just against anyone that violates human rights of Palestinians in any way.
It's about olives.
Okay.
But from the perspective of olives, I sort of see what happens to many Palestinian families because of the wall, the apartheid wall that's being built. One way of resisting, one way of being an activist, one way is that I choose to do through films and writing.
I was very involved with my Jewish community when I was in high school, and since then have found out a lot of new information about what's going on in the Middle East with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and found myself very much attached to the Palestinian side, as it values life for both sides and not just for the Israeli Jewish people. Well, I was born Jewish in Edmonton, Alberta, and I grew up there in a community where I went to summer camp, I went to Jewish day school, I was in a Jewish youth group, and in that sort of setting they convince you that Israel is a really important thing for the Jewish people, and so important that we can't share it, I guess, is the message that gets across. But if you look at this situation without a religious bias or religious lens on it, just from a humanitarian perspective, it's clear that there needs to be a support for both people.
It's just a different perspective than the one that I think the majority of the population gets through the media.
This week, everywhere have been considering the comparisons between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel. And is this just a propaganda exercise? There's nothing wrong with it, but it's more than that. And it's absolute poppycock to say that it denigrates and undermines the South African struggle if we say that the way Israel is behaving is just like apartheid. Clearly, in South Africa and in Israel, it meant that you didn't have property rights, you didn't have trading rights, you didn't have the right to live where you wished. You couldn't even in both cases join the military security structures which are so dominant in both those countries, which opened up the prospects of greater access to very special health services, even education, and particularly the pension issue.
I want to begin just to illustrate one example of how the apartheid regime plays out in the occupied territories from my perspective working as a medic. A Jewish settler living in the West Bank who calls an ambulance, and what their experience is to get to the hospital. They can expect that in about 5 to 10 minutes an ambulance will arrive traveling on well-paved and high-quality highways, much like the ones that we have in Canada, in fact better than the highways that we know in Canada. If a Palestinian living in the West Bank calls an ambulance, the first unknown factor is whether or not that ambulance will be able to reach him or her at all. This is completely unknown because unlike Jewish settlers who travel on a very sophisticated system of highways, Palestinians are forbidden from traveling on those roads. They exist for Jews only.